for Fremantle.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. It's great to speak on this bill. It's another instalment in the rapid progress that the new Albanese Labor government is making to help decarbonise Australia and help make sure that Australian households and businesses are able to participate in one of the great changes of the 21st century. I mean, to some degree, you could say that this is enabling households and businesses to get on board with a trend that is without question a significant part of our future and the world's future, but in many ways it's not really in the distant future. It's happening in lots of other countries to a massive extent today, but not in Australia, and we've fallen terribly behind. It means that Australians miss out on cost savings in terms of running costs, especially in the face of volatile fuel prices. It means we're not getting the benefit in terms of emission reductions, and we need to make emission reductions in lots of parts of Australian life. So far, the reductions that have been made, which have not been enough, have been in the energy generation space and in foregoing planned land clearing, but we've made virtually no progress in terms of emission reductions in other sectors like transport, agriculture industry and other things. And this will contribute to that, there's no doubt. As the previous speaker said, vehicle pollution is a big issue. Vehicle pollution is a massive issue around the world, but it's a big issue here in Australia, not least because we don't have some of the fuel standards and other related emission standards that are pretty common in other parts of the world. And we shouldn't kid ourselves that just because you live in Sydney or Melbourne or Perth or Adelaide or Hobart or Darwin, you think, well, it's not Mexico City or it's not New Delhi, it's not a megalopolis where we tend to associate the impacts perhaps of poor air quality, vehicle emissions and pollution. The reality is, by many measures, people in Australian cities are being exposed to unhealthy level of vehicle emissions, and that is something that we will address as we move to decarbonise our transport sector, move off hydrocarbons and move into electric vehicles and potentially hydrogen vehicles. It's also really important in terms of liquid fuel security, and that's something I've spoken about throughout my time in Parliament. We really should hold on to that. Australia is extraordinarily dependent on liquid fuel. We are the only nation that has been way out of compliance with the IAEA fuel stock holding requirements for a long time. It's very hard to see when we'll ever get back into compliance. We've made a commitment to do that by 2026. The previous government didn't do much on that front. Mining and agriculture in Australia is 90% reliant on liquid fuel. Our transport sector is 99% reliant on liquid fuel. And of course, when it comes to electric cars at the household level for passengers in households around the country, we're in a woeful position. We are the third highest by capita owners of vehicles in the OECD, but we've got 1/7 the uptake of electric vehicles as car-loving countries like the United States and Canada. And really there's only one reason why we're in that terrible state, and it's because of this bizarre blind spot, if you want to be kind, that the previous government suffered. And you can see that it's a blind spot, you can see that it is irrational, delusional, all of those things, by the way that the members of the former government, members of the current opposition, talk about this issue. Even after the election, even in recent weeks, to have the deputy leader of the Liberal Party boldly make the claim that there were no electric utes available. They weren't in production, they couldn't be bought, they didn't exist on planet Earth. I mean, that is just bizarre as well as categorically wrong. And you can only make those kinds of statements when you've just gone off into a kind of la-la land where you've taken a particular twisted, baseless sort of view of the world, and you're going to prosecute that over and over and over in the face of science, evidence, rationality and everything else. It's a pattern of behaviour that we saw from the former government in lots of areas. We certainly saw it on almost anything to do with either climate change or renewable energy, but we certainly saw it in relation to electric vehicles. These wild claims that they would end the weekend, that they didn't exist, that they weren't viable, that they would never happen, while the rest of the world marches ahead. And so what's the result? I mean, you look at our performance in an area like household solar, where we are literally the world leader, because the former Labor government decided that it was time to make a change and get us on the path of sensible renewable energy at the household level, and that kicked off a home solar revolution. We went from having fewer than 12,000 households Australia-wide in 2007 at the end of the Howard government with solar PV to, I think it's 2-3 million plus now. We have the highest penetration of household solar in the world, and it has begun to make a really significant difference, both in reducing our reliance on power that is generated by hydrocarbons, but also in decentralising our power system and giving households relief from those kinds of cost pressures. Electric vehicles will be exactly the same. Electric vehicles will be exactly the same. But we had to change the government to get something done, because until that happened, Australia was being steered by people that were literally making things up and inflicting their weird daydreams or nightmares, or whatever you want to call it, on the Australian people. And apart from the fact that it's meant we now start from this position behind many other countries in the OECD, it has meant that while we talk about cost of living pressures at the moment, that many more Australian households and businesses are at the behest of global fuel prices, when if only a sensible approach had been taken to this issue a decade ago, many fewer households and businesses would be exposed and vulnerable in that way. It means that at various times over the last 3 or 4 years, we have liquid fuel coverage in terms of petrol or diesel that's not much more than 3 weeks, somewhere around 21, 22 days. If for any reason there was an interruption to our supply of liquid fuel, there would be a crisis in this country that would, and I say this cautiously, that would make some aspects of what we experienced through the pandemic actually look pretty mild by comparison. I mean, if our transport sector is 99% reliant on liquid fuels, and most of what moves around in this country moves around by road or by rail. We've gone from having 5 refineries not that long ago to 2 refineries, so we can't import crude and refine it ourselves to the same degree. We're more reliant on imported refined fuel, which of course has a lower shelf life. That's made our liquid fuel insecurity more fraught. So there are lots of reasons to make this change. It's not, as the other side would have it, so that people can indulge in some personal consumer choice. That's got literally nothing to do with it. It is so that we can be part of a global industrial change that has marched on a long way already, and we are miles behind. We are miles behind because of that delusional stance by the previous government, and it's had an impact on people's bottom line, and it's made us more vulnerable. This government's not going to have that, and this government is doing something about it in short time. We think we're beyond the 100-day mark now, but not much beyond the 100-day mark. And this bill will make electric cars cheaper. It will increase the supply of electric cars, and it's in keeping with the approach that we've taken to a number of these areas. We're doing something now, right now, but we're also looking to the changes that will need to be made over the medium and longer term. We've got the discussion paper out on the National Electric Vehicle Strategy. We've said that we're going to use the weight and the influence of government procurement and contracting, the leadership of government procurement and contracting, quite rightly, with the target to ensure that 75% of government fleets are electric by 2025. We've made a commitment in relation to a national EV charging network, which is obviously critical as people take up electric vehicles and need to be able to go further and further afield. I can say that as someone who comes from Western Australia, that is critical. I mean, not just because once you leave, Metro Perth, you are in rural and regional Western Australia, but also because we are the largest and the most remote state. So I know from electric car purchasers and car owner groups in my electorate and in Western Australia more broadly, that they want to see that network extended. Some of them have actually crowdfunded and used other funding source methods to put charging infrastructure at points out in rural and regional Western Australia so that they can drive their vehicles further. But all of these things are being done to address what has been a terrible blind spot in our technological and transport policy settings. I welcome it. I think it's momentous. I know that people in my community will enjoy it, will benefit from it, and I know that businesses will benefit from it, and I know that actually it improves our liquid fuel security, which is a serious vulnerability that for